In an age of online media consumption, which images do you pay attention to? What if I asked you to tell me which of these millions of images you most identify with? Which ones do you remember? Try to emulate? These are a few very broad questions for a digital native to answer, especially considering we might consume thousands of images in a single day. So let's back up a bit. Focus on the most memorable. Take your favorite cult movie, for example. You definitely remember the protagonist. Chances are, if you still remember the movie by heart, it made a lasting impression on you. Did you think about the film's influence on gender and femininity? Did it have an impact on yours? Now consider the fact that there's an entire Instagram popular page section devoted to TV and movies. Film classics and feminine chick flick cult films are abundant in this feed, with usernames such as @2000sbabe, @2000strashed, YourSo2008, YourSo2003, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. These Instagram pages are filled to the brim with screenshots from these iconic cult movies of the 2000s and use the thematic color schemes reminiscent of pink and purple toned chick flick cinema. I say quote-unquote chick flick because it is technically a slang term describing the milieu of films produced by men, targeted and marketed towards women with underlying romantic and marriage plots. What's really interesting to look at, however, is that these 2000s Instagram accounts with screenshots of the films are profiles on social media. Merriam-Webster defines profile, a noun, as, quote, a representation of something, a concise biographical sketch, degree, or level of public exposure, end quote. We know social media profiles as technology hubs that convey our personal and individualized identities that seem to live and breathe online. We live in a time when technology and media blend in ways where filmic culture bleeds into media and online culture. So clearly, there's something of a thematic and generational identity question going on here. My inspiration for this project stems from my own interest in Instagram's algorithm, which serves me countless memes and references to filmic culture, specifically centered around themes of femininity in the 2000s. Oddly enough, it's not just me who sees these images. The photos have hundreds and sometimes thousands of likes and comments. Somehow, in the Instagram niche universe, I am totally not unique in that I relate to and like these images. Clearly, based on my and other users' behavior and relatability to these films' accounts' postings, the general demographic remembers these films well enough to enjoy this content. About 7 months ago, I saw this meme from Twitter, posted on Instagram. In this tweet, we see that American media images really impacted this user's understanding of relatability and cultural identity. In Nicole A. Bogarosh's dissertation entitled The Princess, the Damsel, and the Sidekick, Women as the Other in Popular Films from 2000 to 2011, she cites media scholar Todd Gitlin for saying, quote, hardly anyone is exempt from the forces of American images and sounds, unquote. Bogarosh also believes that Hollywood's global pervasiveness is so strong that it exists as a, quote, global cultural capital, unquote. With Hollywood's media power in mind, exactly how strong is filmic media's influence on young women's perception of identity from films as seen through the interconnectivity of social media? This documentary-style video essay will explore the ways in which our social media craze has picked up upon very important gender dynamics that were set in motion through films of the 2000s that reinforced strict notions of femininity, turning our online profiles and personas into reflections of our own understanding of these filmic identities. Digital identity in millennial and Gen Z young women is a result of mixing both technology and social media with iconic cult films from the past 2 decades. Young women are both cognizant of and shape their identity based on a perceived, shared identity that has seeped through layers of media culture, specifically since the advent of online and social media, with Hollywood's help during the golden age of the chick flick. Cultural and historical influence in Hollywood films of the 2000s created distinct ideas of femininity, and a combined digital experience of early online games and chat rooms shows distinct ties to contemporary shared and mass online identity in these groups of young women, seen again through another wave of Hollywood films about young women's self-expression online. These women of the Hollywood chick flicks are constantly portrayed in very feminine dress, often described as sexy attire. In fact, the University of Southern California's Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism's Inequality in 900 Popular Films report from July of 2017 reveals that Hollywood's interest in women demands that the ideal female blockbuster character is young, sexy, and wears revealing clothing with not much speaking time. In addition to the Annenberg study, Women in Hollywood's 2016 Statistics reports that, quote, female teens were almost 4 times as likely as male teens to be depicted wearing tight or alluring attire. Teenage females also were over twice as likely to be shown with some nudity. Finally, teenaged females more likely to be thin than teenaged males, unquote.
Beds suck. I have really bad breath in the morning. Ew.
Not only was the young female iGen, or Gen Z, and millennial populations exposed to such misogynistic Hollywood notions of femininity, but that these filmic feminine ideals are resurfacing in due time on social media. The social media accounts I previously mentioned, such as 2000s Trashed and Miss 2005, exemplify the distinct profiles of women that Hollywood sought to create during this burgeoning media-crazed era that would expose millions of young girls and women to a curated identity to which they would then find their own identity as they grew up. This cultural phenomenon is so dangerous only because it is self-perpetuating and creates pressure on more young girls to conform to an identity that is projected by distinct sources. In order to address this problem, let's start at the very beginning, with Hollywood. Bogarosh uses cultural studies scholar Stuart Hall's ideas on popular media power because he believes, quote, these images, concepts, and premises provide the frameworks through which we represent, interpret, understand, and make sense of our own social existence, unquote. Bogarosh further develops her thesis by quoting him again in that, quote, cinema exists not as the second-tier mirror held up to reflect what already exists, but as that form of representation which is able to constitute us as new kinds of subjects and thereby discover who we are, unquote. Bogarosh's study of Hall illuminates Hollywood's intense power over viewers' conception of pop culture. She asserts that Hollywood is a key player in this problem because it, quote, circulates some of the most widely viewed images of women, how women should act and look, what the norm is for femininity, etc., and the images urge conformity to stereotypes, unquote. The ultimate intention behind these images is to return women to the quote-unquote heterosexual romance marriage family path and counteract the changes to the patriarchal system undone by feminist movements in the later decades of the 20th century. So what is this getting to? As a greater social trend, Bogarosh helps delineate the exact and direct correlation between the filmic media young millennial and Gen Z women consumed during their early and developmentally formative years and their sense of identity. As young girls, young millennial and Gen Z women were subjected to the overwhelmingly patriarchal film industry's backlash against this 90s feminism. As the generation growing up in the digital age, primed as the first adapters of social media, notions of gender had well been established by internalizing these ideas of femininity and gender roles through cult films. The cult film is recognized as a film that's a blockbuster, generally performs well at the box office, and retains a strong fan base following years and sometimes decades after it leaves the theaters. What's more, the intersection of social media and these popular films' continued life on social platforms, such as Instagram, reinforces both its label as a cult film and its influence on female audiences. Cultivation theory is a great explanation for this correlation. Karen Riddle's 2009 dissertation, Cultivation Theory Revisited, The Impact of Childhood Television Viewing Levels on Social Reality Beliefs and Construct Accessibility in Adulthood, explains how cultivation theory is the dissemination of an impression of a certain real experience unto a viewer of a television show or film. The media consumer or viewer thereby understands and shapes their living reality based off of the perceived reality they learn from watching this media. Another scholar, Jocelyn Nicole Murphy, proposes that, Quote, cultivation theory also reveals that representations in the media affect audiences' perceptions of reality, but more passively. The theory proposes that continuous exposure to specific cultural messages will influence how the audience identifies with that message in the long term, unquote.
I must be dreaming, I'm dreaming. This isn't happening.
Murphy articulates that movie-going audiences are thereby subject to the mass messages put out by blockbuster and cult films.
No, what have I done?
What happened to my purse?
This is a disaster. That was my only chance. I'll never be able to bring her back.
Bring who back?
So in a nutshell, cultivation theory determines that what you watch determines who you are. The pieces of filmic reality become pieces of your own reality through the dissemination of these images. Murphy further references Barbara L. Fredrickson and Tommy Ann Roberts' 1997 study on objectification theory that delineates how, quote, being female may create a shared social experience in that women are constantly exposed to the objectification of the female body and often internalize the observer's gaze, unquote. So not only is the process of cultivation theory an inherently individual metamorphosis, it also sheds light upon a greater theme of relatability among those who experience specifically objectified images.
You look good.